The living room was cloaked in the soft golden glow of a single lamp. Daniel sat hunched over his laptop at the edge of the couch, the screen casting weary reflections in his tired eyes. The only sounds were the gentle hum of the fridge and the occasional creak of the old house settling into the silence of the night. It was just past 2 a.m., and he was finishing up reports for his freelance project, the kind he squeezed in after his daughter Lily was asleep. A framed photo sat beside him on the coffee table, him and Lily at the zoo, both laughing, ice cream smeared across her cheek. It reminded him why he pushed through nights like this. He ran a hand over his unshaven jaw and leaned back with a sigh, eyes fluttering shut for just a moment. Then his phone buzzed, the sharp vibration slicing through the quiet like a whisper. Turned scream. He blinked, frowned, and checked the screen. Unknown number. He almost let it ring out. But instinct, or maybe habit, made him swipe to answer. Hello? Silence. Then a voice, barely above a whisper. Shaky. Young. Can you come get me? Daniel straightened, alert. I think you have the wrong number, he said carefully. There was a pause, a soft gasp. I'm sorry. I didn't know who else to call. I must have misdialed. I didn't mean... He heard her voice crack, like she was trying hard not to. Cry. A car passed in the background wherever she was. Wind. The faint sound of city noise. And fear, undeniable, sharp-edged fear, woven into every word she spoke. I didn't mean to bother you, she added quickly. Daniel opened his mouth to say it's okay and hang up. He wasn't the type to get involved in things like this. He had Lily, he had work, he had enough on his plate. But something in her voice, something hollow and fragile and desperate, held him there. Where are you? He asked before he could stop himself. Another pause. Corner of Pine and Maple, near the closed gas station. Daniel looked over at the clock on the microwave. 2:07 a.m. He stood up, the decision already made before his mind caught up. 2 minutes later, he was quietly knocking on his neighbor's door. Mrs. Klein, a retired nurse who adored Lily, answered in a robe with rollers still in her hair. She didn't ask questions, just nodded, smiled, and said, Go. I've got her. By 2:15, Daniel was pulling on his coat, keys in hand, heart pounding, for reasons he didn't quite understand. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't even sure this was a good idea. But he also knew what it felt like to have no one. He remembered the nights after his wife's accident, how the house had echoed with silence, how he would have given anything for someone to just show up. So now, against logic, against sleep, and against the quiet rhythm of the life he'd tried to rebuild, he stepped into the night and started the car. He didn't know who she was. He didn't know what he would find, but something deep in his gut told him it mattered that someone came, that tonight he was the someone. The streets were empty when Daniel turned onto Pine and Maple. Streetlights flickered overhead like they weren't sure if they wanted to stay awake either. The old gas station stood dark and shuttered, its rusted pumps casting long shadows across the lot. He slowed the car, scanning the sidewalk. Then he saw her. A woman sat curled on the curb, knees pulled to her chest, arms wrapped tightly around them. Her hair was tangled, face streaked with tears. One cheek was red and swollen. Even from inside the car, Daniel could see she was trembling. He pulled over and stepped out slowly, cautious not to startle her. Hey, he said gently, standing a few feet away. You called me. Or maybe you didn't mean to. But I'm here. The woman looked up, startled, eyes wide. For a moment, she looked ready to run. I wasn't calling you, she said, voice hoarse. I meant to call someone else. I must have messed up the number. Daniel nodded slowly. That's okay. Doesn't matter. You needed someone, right? She hesitated, wiped her face with the sleeve of her hoodie, then nodded once, almost imperceptibly. He took a careful step forward. I can take you somewhere safe. A hospital maybe, or... No, she said quickly, shaking her head. No. Police, no hospitals, I'm fine. I needed to get away. She wasn't fine. That much was obvious. But Daniel didn't press. He crouched down a little so he wasn't towering over her. There's a diner just a few blocks from here, he said softly. Still open this late. You can warm up, maybe eat something. No questions. No pressure. She hesitated again, torn between fear and exhaustion. Then finally she gave a shaky nod. The ride was quiet. She sat curled up in the passenger seat, clutching the sleeves of her hoodie, eyes staring out the window, as if watching for ghosts. Daniel didn't speak. He just drove. At the diner, they found a booth in the corner. The waitress didn't ask questions either. She just brought hot coffee and menus with a tired smile. Emily, that's what she told him her name was, barely touched the coffee. But when the food came, she ate like someone who hadn't had a real meal in days. Daniel watched quietly, only speaking when she did. Eventually, she began to talk, her voice low and guarded. She'd left her boyfriend 3 days ago, walked out with nothing but her phone and a little cash. He had hit her, more than once. He controlled who she saw, where she went, even when she could sleep. She hadn't seen her family in over 2 years. They weren't close to begin with, and after she left with him, they'd stopped trying. I thought I was doing the right thing, she said quietly, pushing a fork through the last of her pancakes. I thought love meant staying, fixing, waiting. Daniel didn't respond right away, just nodded, letting her say what she needed to say. I didn't mean to call you, she added after a while, but maybe I did. Maybe some part of me just needed anyone who would come. He offered a faint smile. I'm glad you did. They sat in silence for a moment longer before Daniel pulled out a pen and scribbled his number on the back of the receipt. You don't have to do anything right now, he said. But if you need help figuring out what's next, call me. I can't fix everything, but I'll listen. I'll show up. Emily stared at the number, then at him. Why? She asked, not accusing, just curious. Daniel shrugged lightly. Because someone should. When they stood outside the diner, the night was still cold, but felt a little less cruel. Emily looked uncertain, but steadier. As she disappeared into the shadows of the street, Daniel lingered by his car, watching, until she was gone. He didn't know her, but somehow he knew this wouldn't be the last time they met. It was 3 days later when Daniel's phone rang again. This time he recognized the number before answering. He stood still in the middle of folding laundry, heart thumping a little harder than it should have. Hello? There was a pause, and then Emily's voice came through, quiet but steady. I'm sorry to call again. I've run out of places to go. I've been sleeping in a shelter the past 2 nights. It's not safe. I didn't know who else to ask. Daniel didn't hesitate. Come stay here just for a few nights, until you figure things out. He heard her exhale, a sound that felt like the first breath she'd allowed herself in days. Are you sure? She asked. Yeah, he said. I've got a guest room. It's nothing fancy, but it's warm and safe. By the time she arrived, the sun had slipped below the horizon. Lily was already in her pajamas, curled up on the couch with a book and her favorite stuffed giraffe. She peeked over the top of the pages as the front door opened and Daniel let Emily inside. Emily looked different in the soft yellow light of the house. Her eyes were still guarded, but her posture was less tense, her face no longer marked with fresh bruises. She carried a small tote bag and a folded hoodie over her arm, clearly still traveling light. "This is my daughter Lily," Daniel said as Emily stepped cautiously into the living room. Lily didn't say anything at first, just stared, then offered a small wave. Emily smiled gently. "Hi, Lily. I like your giraffe." Lily nodded, then glanced up at her dad. "Is she staying for dinner?" Daniel glanced at Emily, who looked uncertain. "If she wants to," he said. "What do you think?" Emily hesitated, then nodded. "Sure, I'd love that." That night they had spaghetti, Daniel's go-to when he was too tired to cook anything else. Emily offered to help with dishes afterward, and though Daniel protested, she insisted. There was something in the way she scrubbed the plates, the care she put into wiping the counters, that made him realize how badly she wanted to contribute, to belong, even temporarily. The guest room was small and plain, but Emily thanked him, like it was a five-star hotel. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, looking at the made bed, the folded towels, the tiny potted plant in the windowsill. "I forgot what this kind of quiet feels like," she whispered. In the days that followed, something remarkable began to happen. Emily woke early and made coffee. She swept the porch without being asked. She sat on the floor and played board games with Lily. First in awkward silence, then in shared giggles over silly Monopoly rules and made-up words in Scrabble. Lily, who was usually slow to trust, began bringing Emily her favorite books and asking her to read aloud. One morning Daniel found them baking muffins together, flour dusted across the counter and Lily's nose. Emily still flinched at loud noises. She still avoided mirrors sometimes. But there were moments, fleeting but real, when she laughed, when she sang along with the radio while folding laundry, when she stood a little taller. Daniel watched all this with quiet awe, but also with something more complicated, a stirring in his chest he hadn't felt in years. He hadn't let himself get close to anyone since Sarah. It had been 5 years since the accident. A drunk driver, a rainy night. One blink and she was gone. In the weeks that followed, he'd done everything he could to keep his world from collapsing. For Lily's sake, he worked, he cooked, he smiled when he had to, but the warmth had never really come back. Until now. One evening they sat outside, on the porch after Lily had gone to bed. The sky was painted in streaks of indigo and orange. Daniel handed Emily a cup of tea, and for a while they didn't speak. Then she said softly, "It's strange how being seen by someone can make you feel like a person again." Daniel looked at her. The porch light caught the edge of her hair, and for the first time she looked peaceful. "You've always been a person," he said. "You just forgot for a while." She smiled, and it wasn't sad. Not completely. Two broken souls sitting, shoulder to shoulder in the quiet glow of a house that wasn't quite a home for her yet, but was starting to feel like one. Not because they had fixed each other, but because they had given each other room to heal, and sometimes that was the most anyone could do. The rain came down hard the next evening, drumming against the windows like a warning. Inside the house, Emily stood by the kitchen sink, staring blankly out at the soaked yard. Her phone buzzed on the counter beside her. She glanced at it without thinking, expecting a message from the shelter coordinator she had been contacting, or maybe a promotional spam text. Instead, her breath caught. Unknown number. Her fingers hesitated, then tapped the message open. You think you can hide forever? I always find you. We're not done. Emily's knees went weak. She grabbed the edge of the counter to steady herself. Her heart pounded so loudly she could hear it in her ears. The room spun slightly, tilting as if the floor were pulling away. She hadn't given her ex this number. She had barely used the phone, but somehow, he had found her again. Daniel noticed her silence and walked into the kitchen, towel slung over his shoulder. He paused the moment he saw her face. Emily? She looked up slowly, her eyes glassy and unfocused. He stepped closer. What is it? She held out the phone with a shaking hand. Daniel read the message in an instant, his jaw tightening. That's it, he said, voice steady but cold with resolve. We're going to the police. No, she said quickly, snatching the phone back. We can't. He'll know I talked to them. He'll get worse. He always does. Emily. He already knows where you are, Daniel said, trying to stay calm. This isn't just about you anymore. Lily lives here. That struck her harder than any threat. She stepped back, guilt rising fast and hot. I didn't mean for this to happen. I should have left before now. No one's blaming you. But she was already shaking her head, panic overtaking her reason. You don't understand, Daniel. He's unpredictable. If he comes here, if he hurts Lily... He won't, Daniel said, firmer now. I'll protect both of you. You can't promise that, she whispered. The rain pounded harder as silence fell between them. Lightning flickered through the window. I have to go, she said finally, her voice barely audible. Daniel stepped forward. Emily, don't. Please, don't just run. We can figure this out together. I won't let her get caught in the middle of this, she said, already grabbing her coat. You've done more than enough, but I have to go now. She didn't let him walk her out. By the time he reached the door, she was already halfway down the street, drenched and fading into the downpour like a ghost. He stood there for a long moment, helpless, the cold wind blowing past him. Later that night, Lily wandered into the living room in her socks and pajamas, clutching her giraffe. Daddy? She asked sleepily. Where's Emily? Daniel swallowed hard, kneeling beside her. She had to go take care of something, sweetheart. She'll be okay. Lily stared at him, eyes searching his face for a truth she couldn't name. Then she nodded slowly and hugged him tight. He held her longer than usual. Meanwhile, miles away, Emily sat beneath the awning of a closed laundromat, her coat soaked through, the threatening message still fresh in her mind. She could feel the difference now, the way the night pressed in on her, colder and meaner than it had felt in Daniel's house. She thought of the way Lily had smiled when she beat her at Uno, the way Daniel handed her a cup of tea without ever needing to ask if she was okay. That house had given her something she hadn't had in years, peace, and now she'd left it behind, to protect them. But as she sat in the dark, alone again, she began to wonder if maybe she had made the wrong choice. Maybe running wasn't the only way to survive. Maybe, just maybe, she deserved a place to be safe too. It was early morning when Daniel opened the front door to find Emily standing there. The sun was just beginning to rise, spilling pale gold over the street. and for a moment he thought maybe he was still dreaming. Her hair was damp, her eyes red-rimmed, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. But she was there, wrapped in her coat, clutching a worn tote bag and breathing heavy like she'd just run the last few blocks. He didn't say anything, just stepped aside to let her in. She hesitated, eyes flickering past him into the house. "Is Lily awake?" Daniel shook his head. "Still sleeping." Emily stepped inside, her shoulders sagging with exhaustion and relief. "I didn't know where else to go," she whispered. "You're home," he said softly. "You're safe now." She nodded, tears beginning to slip down her cheeks. "I'm done running," she said. "I want to stop. I want to stop being afraid. I want a life again. Something real." Daniel looked at her, something unspoken in his eyes. "Then let's take the first step." That afternoon, he went with her to the police station. He sat beside her as she gave her statement. He held her hand as she handed over the message from her phone, and he waited quietly while they explained what would happen next. An investigation, a restraining order, protection. By the end of the week, her ex was in custody. The arrest brought no celebration, just quiet relief. The kind of peace that came not from victory, but from surviving. Back at the house, life slowly began to shift again. Emily didn't stay in the guest room anymore. She moved her things into the small sunroom that Daniel had always meant to fix up. Together, they filed paperwork for her new job at a local floral shop. He helped her open a bank account, and she registered for therapy through a women's outreach program nearby. And though she still carried shadows in her eyes, they grew dimmer each day. Lily was the first to truly believe it was all okay now. She clung to Emily with a child's fierce loyalty, hugging her at the door when she left for work, bringing her handmade cards after school. It wasn't long before Lily asked if she could call Emily her friend who lives with us, and Daniel, hearing that from the hallway, smiled to himself. One night, as the stars blinked gently above the porch, Emily and Daniel sat side by side again, mugs of tea resting between them, the cicadas humming in the dark. "I was ready to disappear," Emily said quietly. "I didn't think I mattered to anyone anymore. And then, your voice on the phone, you showing up. You didn't even know me." Daniel looked at her, steady and warm. "You sounded like someone who needed help. That was enough." She turned to him then, really looked at him. "You showed up when no one else did, not even my own family." He nodded slowly. "You stayed when I thought I'd be alone forever." Silence settled between them, not heavy this time, but comfortable, like a blanket shared on a cold night. There was no need to say more. Their lives weren't suddenly perfect. Healing didn't follow a script. Some mornings were harder than others. Some nights still came with bad dreams or quiet tears in the kitchen. But there was light now. Shared breakfasts, slow walks through the park, the rhythm of something ordinary but deeply precious. And in the simple things, Lily's laughter, a meal on the table, two people who once felt broken beginning to stitch a future together. They found something close to redemption, not because love had magically solved everything, but because kindness had opened the door, and they had both walked through. The seasons turned as they always did, without asking permission. Spring melted into a warm, flower-filled summer, and the world seemed a little lighter, as if even the sky had exhaled. Emily had found a rhythm. Her job at the floral shop had bloomed into something she looked forward to. She knew the names of every flower, the meanings behind them, and the regular customers who asked for her by name. Her own apartment, just a short walk from Daniel's house, was small and cozy, filled with books, potted herbs, and second-hand furniture she'd painted in soft colors. She didn't need much. She had roots now, and for the first time in a long time, she had peace. But it was Daniel and Lily who remained her anchor. Every week there was dinner at Daniel's. Sometimes she cooked. Sometimes he did. Often, Lily helped and made a mess of it all, but no one minded. There were movie nights, board games, and trips to the local farmer's market. Sometimes Emily stayed late enough to tuck Lily into bed with a good night story. Sometimes she woke up on the couch with a blanket draped over her, and Daniel drinking coffee at the kitchen table, watching the sunrise. It was slow, what grew between her and Daniel. There were no grand declarations, no whirlwind romance. It was glances across the dinner table, the shared understanding in silence, the way he instinctively reached to steady her when crowds made her tense. It was the way her laughter came easier around him, the way he listened, not just to her words, but to the quiet behind them. He never pushed, never rushed, and that, more than anything, made her fall for him. One afternoon in late June, they decided to have a picnic by the lake. The sun was high, the air thick with the smell of honeysuckle, and the breeze just enough to keep the gnats at bay. Daniel packed sandwiches and fruit, Emily brought cookies, and Lily brought every toy she could carry in her tiny backpack. They spread out a blanket beneath a sprawling oak tree, the leaves casting shifting patterns over their faces. They ate, laughed, and played silly games with sticks and pebbles. Lily made a crown out of dandelions and placed it on Emily's head with pride. "You're the queen of this picnic," she declared. Emily laughed, reaching out to tickle her, and Lily squealed, falling backward onto the blanket. Then, between bursts of giggles, Lily said, without thinking, "Mom, can we go swimming after this?" Everything went quiet for a breath. Daniel froze mid-bite. Emily blinked, her hand still hovering in the air. Lily, realizing what she'd said, looked startled. I mean, Emily," Lily corrected softly, eyes wide. But Emily wasn't upset. Her eyes filled with tears almost instantly. She reached for Lily and pulled her gently into a hug. "It's okay," she whispered, kissing the top of her head. "That was the most beautiful thing anyone's ever called me." Lily smiled against her shirt, burying her face in the familiar scent of Emily's perfume. Daniel watched them, his heart tight, in the best way. Then he reached across the blanket and took Emily's hand. She looked up at him, still holding Lily, and he smiled. A smile filled with everything words couldn't say. "You know," he said, "I never believed in fate or signs or any of that. But that night, that call, if I hadn't picked up—" "You did," Emily said, squeezing his fingers. "That's what matters." They sat like that for a while, the three of them tangled in sunlight and soft grass and something too tender to name. Emily knew the past would always be a part of her. The scars, the fear, the long nights she'd fought to survive. But it didn't define her anymore, because she had made it through. Because she had found a second chance, in the quiet strength of a man who showed up when no one else did, and in the open arms of a little girl who had loved her without conditions. And in that golden stillness, under a summer sky and a canopy of leaves, Emily felt whole, not perfect, not finished, but real. As Lily raced off to chase butterflies and Daniel leaned over to kiss Emily's temple, she smiled and closed her eyes, letting the warmth sink into her skin and her soul. Because sometimes the wrong call is the right beginning.